Summons, Eidolons, Guardian Forces, whatever they're called game to game, giant beasts that do your bidding are a mainstay of the Final Fantasy series. And whilst the likes of Ifrit, Ramuh, Shiva and so on might be the most recognisable, the roster of summons in FF is broad, including those that most players might not necessarily ever encounter, and for good reason too. Because I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and here are the 10 hardest summons to unlock in Final Fantasy. Number 10, Alexander, Final Fantasy VII. Alexander's Judgment, quite famously, is the only holy elemental attack the party has access to in all of Final Fantasy VII, save for the elemental materia and chucking a potion at something maybe. The Righteous Warrior's summon materia is one of the trickiest to acquire in the game, as there's a limited window to get it and some rather obscure directions to follow in order to do so. Alexander is found on the Great Glacier, an area Cloud and the party visit only once. They can find a map of this area beforehand, but it's quite disorientating and difficult to follow. The player must first find the hot springs in the east, which Cloud will touch with his hands. Having done so, you must then traverse the snowfield, and eventually you'll enter a cave with a character known only as Snow. She'll fear that Cloud will touch her with his dirty hands and attack. After her defeat, Snow will be gone, and the Alexandra materia will be left on the ground. In the process, it's incredibly easy to take a wrong turn, and almost as easy to collapse in the cold and interrupt your efforts. The process being so obscure, it's difficult to see how players would have known how to do this before the advent of the internet. Number 9, Eden, Final Fantasy VIII. In Final Fantasy VIII, Squall's party obtains the majority of their Guardian Forces by using the draw command on specific bosses. If the player failed to obtain a particular summon in this way, the only chance they have to obtain it is from one of the bosses in Ultimecia's castle at the very end of the game. Eden's non-elemental attack, Eternal Breath, is incredibly slow and incredibly strong, capable of dealing more than the familiar 9,999 damage of a single attack. Eden also provides the party with some very rare and powerful abilities, for example the coveted Devour, which allows the equipped character to eat weakened enemies and obtain various stat buffs for doing so. Naturally then, Eden is very difficult to acquire. Before the castle, it can only be obtained by using draw on the optional super boss Ultima Weapon. This horror awaits in the depths of the Deep Sea Research Centre away in the corner of the world map. The lower levels of this area are home to some very strong and difficult foes, and even before getting to those status ailment-inducing pains, the player must contend with a puzzle that involves expending steam units to open doors and ensuring you don't run out along the way. Before that, Bahamut himself must be fought and bested on the upper levels. And when you do reach Ultima Weapon, well, it's called Ultima Weapon for a very good reason. Good luck. Number 8, Ark, Final Fantasy IX. In Final Fantasy IX, Ark is the ultimate shadow eidolon and can be summoned only by Garnet. Acquiring this unconventional airship/robot of a beast is a very tall order. It can be learned only from the pumice. Its item's requirements are varied but very specific. The first option is to defeat the super boss Ozma, which is found in Chocobo's Sky Garden. Secondly, players can collect one of the later Chocographs, steal from Ark at Olivert, or steal from Ozma. The latter three options each reward a pumice piece. Two of these pieces can be given to Hades, who is hidden in the watery area of his synthesis shop, and he will make them into a pumice. This shop cannot be accessed, however, without first battling Hades, an optional super boss in his own right. Obtaining Ark then requires tangling with one or other, or even both, of the most challenging enemies in the whole game. Number 7, Knights of the Round, Final Fantasy VII. It's quite common for RPGs to offer ultimate weapons, but then there are ultimate weapons, the ones that manage to trivialize the rest of the game. Final Fantasy VII's Knights of Round summon materia is certainly one such thing. The attack Ultimate End sees a series of 13 knights each strike the foe separately, meaning it's possible to hit 9,999 13 times. The Knights of the Round materia is found on a small island to the very northeast of the map, in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by mountains, and with no clear patch for the high wind airship to land on, a gold chocobo is required to enter the small cave and claim the materia. It's that very gold chocobo that makes the summon so difficult to unlock. Breeding a gold chocobo is a time-consuming and frustrating affair, requiring specific items, combinations of chocobo traits, and almost certainly a guide or two. Alternatively, the Desert Rose can be traded to the Calm Traveller for a gold chocobo, but this is potentially even more difficult. The item is a reward for defeating Ruby Weapon, the optional super boss that is one of only 2 realistic targets for Knights of the Round in the first place. Number 6, Tomberry King, Final Fantasy VIII. Like several of the PS1 era Final Final Fantasy title summons, the aforementioned Alexander being a major offender, the Tomberry King is another that would have been super difficult to find or even learn about in the age before game FAQs and so on. In this title, Tomberries are found in the Centra Ruins, a rather obscure and entirely optional area of the map. This is where Odin is found, fought and unlocked, but it's the Tomberries that are particularly important here. As is typical of these recurring creatures, they have tremendous HP relative to other enemies of their level, are slow moving and capable of instantly KOing any party member if they have the chance to use their knife on them. To defeat them quickly, players will typically need to use the Aura spell and unleash waves of limit breaks on them. After around 20 Tomberries are defeated, the Tomberry King will immediately take over the battle. It has high physical power, an excess of HP, and a potentially lethal counter-attack. The battle can be very difficult if the player takes him on too soon, but the reward is quite an unconventional Guardian Force. Tomberry learns some unique skills which give the player discounts in shops and allows them to access the game's various shops from the main menu. Neat. Number 5. Odin, Final Fantasy IV. Odin is well known throughout the series as a formidable warrior who rides a menacing steed. As a summon, his signature attack, Zantetsuken, tends to immediately cause death to all foes struck if they're susceptible to such. He's generally not a part of the main campaign, but available to challenge and/or acquire if the player chooses to do so. In Final Fantasy IV, the bout with Odin is available at Baron Castle, as the wily warrior seems open to a match with a worthy opponent. Though his 20,000 HP isn't insurmountable, it's important not to take him on too early. At level 53, he's a significant threat, particularly when considering that time is of the essence here. His Zantetsuken can be devastating if he gets a chance to use it. Carefully balancing recovery needs and large bursts of damage to make the most of his only weakness, lightning, is the way to victory. For an additional challenge, if needed, the dreaded Lunar Odin also appears in later versions of the game. Perhaps one of the toughest bosses in Final Fantasy IV, this fiend has far more HP and isn't afraid to unleash consecutive Zantetsukens to demolish even the most powerful of parties. Number 4. Crusader, Final Fantasy VI. Some of the most powerful attacks in the series, such as Vivi's shadow element spell Doomsday, have to be used with great care due to one unfortunate factor: they hit the party as well as enemies. This is also true of Crusader, the Esper of all Espers in Final Fantasy VI. To acquire Crusader's Magicite, the player must do no more or less than defeat the legendary dragons. All of them. Each is a formidable opponent in its own right, with the roster including the Holy Dragon, the AoE specialist Ice Dragon, and the hideous Skull Dragon, which is rather infamous for its status spreading. Unlocking Crusader, in short, requires quite the trek around the world of Ruin and a rather grueling series of battles. Crusader's attack, Cleansing, is a suitably theatrical affair in which a huge red explosion expands and engulfs the battlefield. With the animation in mind, it's really not surprising that this causes friendly fire, but it's very unfortunate as far as the summon's utility goes. Crusader's Magicite is an impressive prize for completionists, but it's not really much more than that. Number 3. Chaos, Final Fantasy XII. Wind element summons, interestingly, can be particularly difficult to track down. In Final Fantasy VII, to unlock Typhon, the player has to complete the notorious puzzle-filled area that is the Ancient Forest. Much later in the series, Chaos is also a challenge locked behind the bosses Humbaba Mistant and Fury. While both of these foes have a bit of a comic relief role, the battles are not to be taken lightly. Both are able to boost themselves when their HP begins to fall, and Fury's signature use of the attack buffing status represents a particular threat. They're found at the Necrohole of Nabudis, and defeating them both is just the beginning. It unlocks the Medallion of Might, and so the player must then battle Chaos itself. The developers of FF12 saw fit to outfit Chaos with various ways to limit the party's access to magic. A swift use of silence is an effective way to do this, and it's a rudimentary tactic that's crucial to be aware of. Physical damage is limited, which means the player will need to carefully approach the fight in order to cut down Chaos's 200,000 HP while weathering its own potent attacks. After finally prevailing, Chaos's license can be purchased. Number 2. Major Sisters, Final Fantasy X. As any lightning hopper will know, Final Fantasy X boasts its share of intriguing little side stories and mini-games. One of these, the Monster Arena, is quite the time sink. Capturing fiends is quite engaging and ultimately worth it for those seeking the game game's strongest and most unconventional Aeon, the Mage's Sisters. To unlock them, the player must complete several objectives. The first is to engage in the battle arena until the Mount Gagazet area's beasts are all captured. Then Anima must be available as an Aeon, and the only way to do this is to complete every Cloister of Trials, not a small ask in itself. The party also needs access to Yojimbo, who is battled at the Cavern of the Stolen Faith, and must then be persuaded to join as an Aeon by offering Gil. With the two Aeons, the Blossom Crown and the Flower Scepter, and having completed a battle against Bahamut, Tidus and co can gain access to the Temple Chamber where the Mage's Sisters are unlocked. It's quite a journey, and the fact that Anima in particular is needed, itself a tricky Aeon to unlock, as just one step of that journey is testament to how much of a pain it is to unlock the Mage's Sisters. And number 1, Bahamut, Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings. Bahamut, like Odin, is a formidable Final Fantasy icon, and one that must often be bested in battle before deigning to lend his power to the party. This is a common thread in Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings, and this version of Bahamut is quite the challenge to acquire. The destroyer of the Sky Sea himself, Bahamut has unlocked after his defeat in Wings of Midnight, the game's 79th grueling mission. This one is certainly a test of the player's ability to cultivate a solid team. Titan must first be overcome in this battle, followed by Ramu, then Shiva, then Ifrit, each armed with formidable attacks of their familiar elements, and with waves of other mobs distracting the player and splitting their focus. There are also summoning gates to contend with. Only with considerable farming can a player's party reach the level needed to brute force this one. Tactical play and a careful balance of offense and defense is needed, and that's before Bahamut even arrives. The Dragon King's guards are damage sponges in and of themselves, and his own attacks, while not very fast, are some of the strongest of all Espers. Final Fantasy is absolutely all the rage right now. Check out this video we did on why Final Fantasy 16 is genius. Make sure you like this video and leave a comment down below on the hardest summons for you to obtain in Final Fantasy. Which ones did we miss? Head over to WhatCulture.com for more content every day. I've been Sai for WhatCulture, and have a good week.